Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Tim McBride, and I've been given the dubious whatever of chairing this panel today. We hope it's going to be something rather special for all of you. And we're very grateful to the Office of the Privacy Commissioner for organising it. I fear I may forget to say that at the end. It's intended to be provocative, wide-ranging. Be warned, some of it may be confronting. And mindful of that health and safety warning, hopefully some of you will be able to return to work, those of you returning to work after our session, free of some of the visible discomfort of those who attended at least my session I went to. It was provocative stage adaptation of 1984. It's one of the must-see shows of the Auckland Arts Festival. It's really something quite powerful. Interestingly, today, March the 14th, is my Freedom Day. How many people knew that? Well, it is. Yes, it is for those of us who are addicted to multiple daily doses of that fake news channel, CNN. They've been running a most impressive campaign involving people speaking, young and old, very powerfully about what freedom means to them. And I must say, it's brought tears to my eyes on occasions. It's just so moving. And the legendary host, Christiane Amanpour, described freedom, the importance of freedom to her. She said, "Freedom for me means never ever taking it for granted." Never ever taking it for granted. I thought of that and I thought George Orwell would have approved of that. Because when he was challenged after the publication of the book, New York tabloid, the Daily News, said the book was basically a thinly veiled attack on the then Labour government of the time. He responded as follows. He said, "The book's set in Britain in order to emphasise that the English-speaking peoples, races, are not innately better than anyone else, and that totalitarianism, if not fought against, could triumph anywhere." And that seems to be, for me, one of the key messages I take from the book. And it's hard to believe that it was published in 1949, nearly 70 years ago. Now that just happens to be the year I was born, and I find that rather hard to believe, at least on some days. And of all the books that I read, forced or otherwise, during my childhood, no book made quite the impact on me as 1984. And I've often thought, why was that? What was it about this book, this terrifying vision, that had such an effect? Was it due to my gifted sixth form English teacher, a local thespian who used to read passages from it in a tone that just scared the living daylights out of us, his captive students? Or I sometimes wonder, was it due to my late father, who'd worked in wartime intelligence throughout World War II, the forerunner to the SAS, in fact. And perhaps in reading me a bedtime story, he'd snuck in passages subliminally from 1984 as a way of inculcating in me that this was something I needed to take on board and never forget. Well, today we've got three highly qualified, talented, experienced speakers. They may choose either to introduce themselves after I've introduced them, that is, to speak briefly and then be available for questions from me, from others, or give a speak for up to 15 minutes. And the first sitting next to me, those of you who have seen 1984 will have seen Terence Crawford on the stage, an absolutely terrifying interrogator, torturer, whatever. As I said to him a few moments ago, I found him more terrifying because he had that sense that he could sort of finish work for the day, tortured X, Y, and Z, and hop on the suburban train home and do a bit of gardening and listen to a bit of music and say, oh, I've had a good day at the office today. He's a leading Australian actor, stage, screen, you name it. He's a playwright. He's had work produced on the stage, on radio, TV. He's the author of a number of significant books in his profession, relating to his profession. He's an adjunct professor at the University of Adelaide. So here we have someone who's a wonderful actor, a multi-talented person. It's great to have him with us today. Next to him is someone well known, I would suspect, to just about all of you, Russell Brown, media commentator, internet pioneer in New Zealand, pundit, you name it, someone that you listen to, someone who speaks with authority, with wisdom about this area of the media and how it's evolving and how online aspects, the internet, whatever, in a way that makes sense, is accessible to those like myself for who it's a constant struggle. And at the end, we have our distinguished Inspector General of Intelligence and Security, Cheryl Gwyn. It's great that, Cheryl, that you're able to be with us today. She was appointed Inspector General in 2014 and reappointed in 2017. She had a distinguished career as a member of the legal profession, 10 years as Deputy Solicitor General at Crown Law, leadership roles in the Department Ministry of Justice, Deputy Secretary in fact, and a litigation partner in 2 leading New Zealand law firms. And if you go to her website, which I commend to you, it's a very impressive website, and there you'll find copies available of the reports that she's produced since taking over. I think it's fair to say that she's raised the bar in terms of the role of Inspector General quite dramatically. Those reports are impressive in a way that I rather doubt would have been done by her predecessors. They were distinguished High Court judges, but as Inspector General, the current incumbent, Cheryl Gwyn, is doing a remarkable job, and I commend you for that. So we'll start with Terry, and we'll just see how it flows and go from there.
Thank you. Thanks very much, and thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be back in New Zealand and back in Auckland for the first time for 25 years. I was in South Island a few years ago on a family holiday, but it's been amazing to see Auckland 25 years after my last time here. I haven't written anything to prepare, but a few thoughts that I thought I would share as perhaps some seeds that might find some nurture throughout the conversation from particularly the input of my esteemed colleagues. One of the most terrifying things about the role of O'Brien is this thing that Tim picked up about being able to go home and say, I've had a good day at the office. That was the hardest thing to get my head around when someone was, for a character who has such, well, firstly from a theatrical sense, such wonderfully powerful text that my strength and my weakness as an actor is my excitability, and I immediately dove straight into a very extravagant kind of response to that text, and was directed to continually say, no, it must be done easily. You have to do it with ease. We played 100 performances in about 9 different theatres now, and the capacity to do it with ease is determined by the architecture of the building. In a big house, you can't do it that easily. In a smaller house, like His Majesty's in Perth, for example, or this theatre here, then one can do it a little more easily. But the ease is important, and it's also the terrifying factor that this is a day at the office. And it speaks to the indwelling of a regime's logic inside its people and what becomes normal. O'Brien in the book, in the play, is curing Winston. He is helping him. He is cleansing him. There's a very peculiar strain of homoerotica through the book that we wanted to capture something of on stage. Winston can scarcely mention O'Brien without talking about his physical attraction to him, which is a very unusual kind of perspective. But I think perhaps what's more significant than a homoerotic strain is the notion that when being tortured, one falls in love with the torturer because they're the only person that can relieve the pain. So that was a pretty terrifying thing to come to terms with too. So I'm interested in a couple of other things that I wanted to put up forward as kind of prompts. One is, I wondered, what is privacy and what is its value? What is freedom and what is privacy? Well, Winston Smith says that freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 is 4, which is a pretty neat summation. And we know that there are many times in our worlds, well, I won't speak of your country, which most Australians acknowledge has grown more liberally than ours over the last 20 years. But it becomes increasingly difficult to say that 2 + 2 is 4. I'm also interested in what is privacy. When I was about, I was a pretty young dad. I was 22, I think, when my eldest daughter was on the way, and so I read books about how to be a parent. And I remember reading this thing about individuation, and the writer put forward a notion that the perfect scenario for the balanced child would be to give them the sense that they are exploring the world alone while you are watching them. So if you have a sealed backyard and you send the kid into the backyard, they can muck about and feel that they're entirely on their own, exploring the universe, and yet they are safe because you are watching them. That seems to me to be a sensible idea, and I really dug that, and I adopted it, and I tried to continue to kind of apply it as a parent. Now, if we were to say to our governments, what should our response, what's the context for your surveillance of us, they would give us an answer that's pretty much exactly the same. After terror attacks, we're told to go about our business and pretend that everything's okay. Don't be defeated by it. Continue to explore the world. Continue to grow from your exploration of the world, and we've got your back. Remembering that Big Brother is watching you is not a warning; it's a comfort. Don't worry, we're watching after you. So, what is the difference between that mode of parenting and this other scenario that we find ourselves in is to me an interesting question that I haven't entirely resolved, but I might learn something more about in the next little while. The obvious thing is that we're being infantilized. And I guess the other thing that's of interest to me is it's fascinating to celebrate the ways in which Orwell made warnings that are prescient and salient in our world. The things that he got right, if you like. But I think it's also at least as significant to acknowledge the things that he didn't get right, the things that he didn't anticipate. The kind of power that he specifically is writing about is a power for its own sake. Power is power over people, and O'Brien is at pains to point out to Winston that that is the end in itself. I guess we're subject to two different types of surveillance. One is justified by notions of a dangerous world. The other, privacy that we forego willingly, is to the market. Is the foregoing about privacy in relation to social media and things like that we willingly forego. The idea that the world would be ruled by the market is not part of Orwell's projection. If you go through the book or the play and replace the word the party with the market, it becomes chillingly real. All that our big brother wants us to do is keep spending, keep earning enough to spend, and keep spending. That's not part of Orwell's vision. So I think that distinction of why we're being, what the nature of this invasion of our privacy is worth considering as well. I might leave it at that for now.
All right, that's very interesting what Terry's had to say. I just thought that there are a couple of passages in 1984 that can assist in terms of what privacy is. One, of course, is what Winston himself says when he says he was acutely aware that to do anything that suggested a taste for solitude, even to go for a walk by oneself, was always slightly dangerous. There was a word for it in Newspeak, one life, own life, very own life. It was called, meaning individualism and eccentricity. So there are some wonderful definitions of what privacy, that aspect, that key aspect of privacy is in 1984 itself. Russell?
Right, well, I guess what I'm going to talk about is less about how and whether surveillance should be conducted, and more about the fact that it is being conducted by multiple parties and what the implications of that are. And it follows on a little bit from what Terence said about the market. When I first became a full-time IT journalist in 1996, I really hit the ground running because I discovered a really good source of stories, which was that someone had written a script that listed all the new domain names that had been registered that month. And there weren't that many at the time. Basically, you had a whole lot of companies and organisations going online for the first time and registering their domain names. So armed with that monthly list, I'd simply use a simple tool called Whois and look up and find out who they were. And the domain registration information handily even had the phone number of the person who registered the new domain name. And I'd ring these people and they would be absolutely astonished that A, that I knew, and B, that I'd been able to get hold of them so easily. And they genuinely hadn't grasped that this was all public. And that's actually something that has only relatively recently been addressed by Internet NZ, because there are people who, for very good reasons, might want that kind of information, particularly the contact information, to stay private. There were, I don't think even people in the industry really understood it that well, because that same year I started, we did a little front page story where we mapped out all the servers on Extra's new network. In May of 1996 when Extra was about to launch. And it was quite a good story because all the servers were named after movie monsters, so it's quite a fun story. But various telecom executives were absolutely alarmed. They thought they'd been hacked because they did not know that this could be done. And again, it was another very simple tool, NS lookup. We just typed in IP addresses and changed the number on the end, did an NS lookup, and we managed to map the whole thing. And people did not realise that there was this record of who they were, where they were, what they were doing. Even more so, there was, I don't think people really grasped that everything and everywhere they went on the internet was logged in their internet service providers' logs. No one ever looked at the logs because it was kind of difficult and unwieldy and also considered unethical. And I'm not sure even whether the police had the skills to inspect logs at the time anyway. That's still the case. Everywhere you go is logged. Except it's even more so than that now, because something much bigger is going on with data that's a little less accessible but much more comprehensive. FPOS, the various ways mobile phones track us, Uber, online shopping, social media. We are leaving trails of breadcrumbs everywhere. And that's exacerbated by the fact that the business model of the big online services companies, Facebook, Google and the rest, is based on collecting that information about us and analysing it. And that information is available to the state in certain circumstances. The question is what those circumstances are. And along those lines, I think something quite alarming is happening in China under Xi Jinping. This year, late last year actually, a company owned by Alibaba, Sesame Credit, began the rollout of, it's a credit rating system for people, basically. Imagine a system that tracks what books you read, your behaviour on social media, how long you spend playing video games, and assigns you a score based on those activities. That score is public. Your friends will know that if you have a low score associating with you, we'll bring their scores down too. And it's important to have a high score for other reasons. It makes it easier to, say, hire a car. You'll get privileges like faster airport check-ins and even faster internet. It's like a big loyalty system, basically. But it's about to actually get worse. In 2 years' time, the Chinese state will launch its own version of this scheme, its so-called social credit system, and it will incorporate exactly the same data. Because the state there is effectively using its own analogues of Facebook and Google and PayPal and their predictive algorithms, which is a key part of this, to lay the ground for a system where every person will be tracked and ranked as a citizen. You will get a score. It's a big data nightmare, and it's not 1984 or Black Mirror, it's real, and it's coming in 2 years' time under Xi Jinping. And don't think that it could only happen in China. A couple of years ago, the US Transportation Security Administration proposed the idea of expanding pre-check background checks so you can get on a plane at all. This is domestic travel, to include social media records, location data, and purchase history. Again, this is for American citizens travelling domestically. You would have to surrender all those things in order to get on a plane. That's a massive restriction of freedom of movement. It was rejected at the time, but don't be surprised if there is another attempt, because travellers, seeking to enter the US may already be asked to hand over their social media accounts, even their passwords, and again, this is a serious proposal to make the freedom of movement of US citizens contingent on surrendering their privacy. As a Wired magazine article put it in October, we're getting closer to the Chinese system, the expansion of credit scoring into life scoring, even if we don't know who we are. And again, this is all being enabled by the fact that all these other companies are for commercial reasons, and we get something back from it. Google captures our information, but it gives us all this cool stuff, and that's the bargain we've made. But they are there and they're collecting that information. So I think this is where the problem lies, not only in whether we might be surveilled, but in the fact we're already being surveilled, and we may not have any control over that information. There are some countervailing trends. Privacy laws do matter. On the Herald website today, Yuha Saranen has a story on the changes at tech companies that are being driven by the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, which anyone who wants to do business in Europe has to pay attention to. And he cites the case of Cisco hiring its first chief privacy officer. American companies traditionally haven't been great on privacy, and the company's plans to actually code the regulation into its application. So this is kind of promising. And for all the stick it gets, I think Apple Computer does a reasonably good job of this too, even when it's butting heads with the state. But I think it's also worth noting that 1984 isn't only about the surrender of privacy, it's about the control of language and the undermining of the idea of objective truth. And that can be more slippery in some ways. I also think that that's a reason that journalism matters. Journalists are in a slightly odd position. We're both sides of the line on this kind of issue. In one sense, we're doing God's work and bringing something like the objective truth to the consumers of our work. On the other hand, we are using a lot of those tools. If you've ever wondered why journalists, say at the Herald, can find people who are suddenly in the news so quickly, it's because they've got commercial tools that do that. I think it's called tracker tools. So we've been doing that kind of thing for quite a while. We have the excuse that we are doing God's work, but maybe that's not always the case. But we've seen something of the undermining of the idea of truth in the Russian disinfo campaigns in Europe and America, which are essentially aimed at undermining trust in governments, institutions and state systems. And they're based on the idea that if people believe nothing is real, they might believe anything. Which does bring us to an irony, because as things stand at the moment, our best chance of finding out more about those same activities involves the US states' access to communications on a truly massive scale, which is the thing we've all been worried about for a while. So I guess I'll end this little bit by noting that there are some fundamental conflicts, and I don't exactly know how we get out of it.
Thank you, Russell.
Cheryl.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and certainly the invitation to speak prompted me to reread 1984 for the first time in a very long time, and it also meant I had the privilege of seeing the production of 1984 last night. And what has been interesting for me is to come back to Orwell, considerably older, but also with a very different perspective. So last night in the theatre and last week when I was rereading the book, I read and watched through the lens of someone who has a close knowledge of New Zealand's intelligence and security sector. As Inspector General of Intelligence and Security, a dreadful mouthful, my job is to make sure that New Zealand's two intelligence agencies, the New Zealand Security Intelligence Service, the SIS, and the Government Communications Security Bureau, the GCSB, act lawfully and properly. And my office monitors and reports on how they use their powers. And without a doubt, their powers are hugely intrusive. If they get an intelligence warrant, they can do a whole range of things which, if carried out by the ordinary citizen, would constitute criminal offences. They have legal authority to covertly access computers, intercept phones and email, break into people's homes to plant devices or cameras, tracking devices on your cars, and share at least some of the data they obtain with local and foreign law enforcement and other intelligence agencies. All done with a warrant, but nevertheless hugely intrusive powers. So what my office does is to check that what the agency is doing is legal. Obviously the question for us is, what does 1984 mean for us today? And I think if you ask the question in a casual way, many people might say we do have a surveillance state akin to Orwell's 1984. But I think if we're going to pose the question seriously, we do need to put some structure around that analysis. And I'd say this isn't original thinking on my part, but the American Civil Liberties Union has looked at this issue on occasion and put a little bit of a framework around how you approach the question. And they ask a series of questions. First, are we technologically capable of building a total surveillance society? Two, have those technological capacities been utilised to build infrastructures for mass surveillance? To what extent are those infrastructures actually being used to collect, store and analyse people's data? To what extent is surveillance being used by law enforcement and other agencies to enforce laws and regulations and norms? And finally, I think probably the critical question, to what extent is that surveillance being done in an undemocratic manner and or being abused to maintain power and stifle dissent? So very briefly, I want to look at those questions. I think first, there is no doubt we have the technological capacity to build a surveillance society. Some of what Russell's talked about goes to that point. We've long surpassed the tally screen of 1984, although I did think again that all-in-one device that operates as a television, a security screen and a microphone is pretty clever. But if we think about some of the present technological possibilities of surveillance, we've got cameras, including by CCTV, interception of our mail, email and phone calls and texts, including real-time interception, the collection and retention of that data, automated number plate recognition technology, facial recognition technology, IMSI catches, the ability to remotely manipulate personal information and property. So The technological developments, and I've only touched on some of them, are clearly there, and from that perspective, there's nothing to stop us from building a surveillance society. The next question is whether, or to what extent, those capabilities have actually been used to build infrastructures that can be used for mass surveillance. And I think there are significant infrastructures that now exist, whether or not they are used by law enforcement and intelligence agencies. We have the cell phone network, we have the internet, including social media and all its guises. In places like the UK, the vast network of CCTV cameras. Then there are the infrastructures that are still under development, building on those new technologies. So particularly in the UK and the US, if not in New Zealand, the development of a nationwide network using the automated number plate recognition technology, drone surveillance, Wi-Fi or radio frequency identification system readers, and as Russell touched on, predictive analytics. And I read an article yesterday about the Chicago Police Department use of computer algorithms over the last 4 years. They use those algorithms to rate every person arrested with a numerical threat score from 1 to 500 plus. Almost 400,000 Chicago citizens now have an official police risk score. The algorithm is secret, it's publicly unaccountable, so there's no oversight of what that algorithm is or how it's used, but it shapes policing strategy and the use of force. And interestingly, if police stop someone who has previously been arrested, then their personalised threat score appears on the dashboard computer in the police vehicle. It's also a factor in who gets targeted for proactive police intervention, and one of the many criticisms of the technology is that has resulted in ultimately in racial discrimination. So in addition to those generally available infrastructures, there are also the specific infrastructures that have been built by agencies such as the NSA in the US, GCHQ in the UK, and as the Michael Cullen Patsy Reddy report of a couple of years ago stated, in New Zealand by the GCSB on a much smaller scale, of course, which can be used specifically for the purpose of bulk collection of information. In 1984, Big Brother controls the facts and the narrative through the Ministry of Truth, and as the other speakers have said, if you control the language and the facts, then ultimately you control thought. So do or could our state use the existing infrastructures to control our thoughts as in 1984? The phrase alternative facts is now indelibly associated with the Trump administration, but as early as 2004, Karl Rove, a senior White House advisor to George W. Bush, suggested to a reporter that he, the reporter, belonged to a reality-based community, a sort of quaint minority of people who believe that solutions emerge from studying discernible reality. And he said that's not the way the world really works anymore. So does the manipulation of facts and the technical ability for governments to see and hear virtually everything we do amount to full control? There's a blogger I follow who I think is really excellent on these issues. His name's Bruce Schneier, and his blog is Schneier on Security. And he said, if we are observed in all matters, we are constantly under threat of correction, judgment, criticism. We become constantly fearful that patterns we leave behind will be brought back to implicate us by whatever authority has now become focused upon our once private and innocent acts. We lose our individuality because everything we do is observable and recordable. In short, people act differently when they know they're being watched. And I think that's something that privacy advocates have argued strenuously, that government surveillance has a chilling effect. And there were several studies in the US after the Edward Snowden revelations of NSA spying in 2013, which concluded that knowledge of those activities did in fact spook, if you'll excuse the pun, people about a third of those who were aware of the Snowden stories said they changed their internet or phone habits as a result. Some said they avoided using certain terms online, others said they were having more conversations face-to-face instead of over the phone. And of course, just because we have an infrastructure that enables surveillance doesn't necessarily mean that it's being used for that purpose. Data could flow through government hands without being stored or examined, or it could be stored without being analysed. And I think signals intelligence, SIGINT agencies around the world argue that. They say, well, we may collect bulk data, but it's only a fraction of what we could collect, and we only look at and analyse only a small fraction of that amount. So essentially, don't be worried. And it's true that there is debate and controversy over the extent to which these technologies are being used by intelligence agencies, but I think we should assume that those agencies will over time push to exploit the technologies to the fullest. The fourth question that this framework uses is, are those surveillance tools actually used for enforcement? And I think we only need to look to law enforcement to see that indeed they are. While New Zealand might lag behind in some respects, in comparable jurisdictions, clearly they are. So the CCTV cameras in the UK are ubiquitous, to the extent that there is a specialist surveillance camera commissioner whose role is to keep an eye on their use. Automated facial recognition technology is being used by the UK police, as is automated number plate recognition on a systematic basis. Chinese police now wear glasses that incorporate facial recognition technology. And obviously body and motor vehicle cameras are routinely used by police forces all over the world. Intelligence agencies justify their surveillance principally these days in terms of stopping terrorism and on an international basis exchange information with other agencies and with law enforcement bodies. And they do collect bulk data, as the Cullinan Reedy report acknowledged. And there is now a specific power in New Zealand to also obtain bulk data from other government agencies and to match that data with the data that the agencies have. Finally, the concept of a surveillance society really is tightly bound up with totalitarian political regimes that use their surveillance infrastructures to suppress dissent and maintain power. And I think that despite the technological capacity and infrastructure that exists, that central image of 1984 of a boot standing on a human face is not the reality in New Zealand today. Having said that, I don't underestimate the impact of policing strategies and practices or intelligence agencies focus on particular communities. So I don't want to underestimate that all of those things can impact heavily on sectors of our society. One of the themes relevant to national security is the vital importance in democracy of rational thought and rational assessment of threats and relative threats and how we respond to those. And I think that means that it's vital that the discussion of threats to New Zealand's security and how we respond to those threats aren't dominated by a particular perspective or a vested interest. As in other aspects of our democracy, we need multiple voices, we need challenge, critique, and checks and balances. And being a lawyer, I would of course have to refer to our Chief Justice, Dame Shana Elias. She said, talking about the rule of law generally, but I think it's opposite. It's very difficult for anyone to resist headlong self-conviction when convinced that the end they have in sight is right. As she said, there is little as distorting as a conviction that you are the good guy, that you are on the right side. That's all the more so when you necessarily operate in secret, when you only talk with your colleagues and with your international counterparts. In the Australian context, in relation to ASIO, this has been called the noble cause syndrome. Our intelligence agencies make mistakes, but they're not malign. But I think they, as other bodies that operate in secret, are at risk from that very secrecy. The Snowden disclosures opened up that discussion in New Zealand as elsewhere about what are the threats that are real for us and how do we deal with them. And it comes up repeatedly today, for example, in the context of encryption and the debate about whether government should be allowed to mandate backdoors in order to get around the issue of encryption. We do have protections. In New Zealand, the intelligence and security agencies are established by statute, legislation from last year, which also sets out their powers and responsibilities. We take that for granted, but it hasn't always been the case. The SIS has existed since 1956, and the predecessor to the GCSB since about the same time. But the SIS existed without a legislative base between 1956 and 1969. Only then was it set up by statute. The formation of the GCSB from its predecessor organisation was approved by Robert Muldoon as Prime Minister in 1977, but its existence, functions and activities were kept secret. It was only in 1980 that the existence of the GCSB was disclosed on a very limited basis, with briefings to Cabinet and the Leader of the Opposition, but even then its significant functions weren't acknowledged. And ironically, it was only in 1984 that Prime Minister Muldoon publicly acknowledged the existence of the GCSB and what it actually did. And it wasn't placed on a statutory footing until 2003. One of the other more specific protections is that everything the agencies do that would otherwise be unlawful must be done under the terms of an intelligence warrant. And those warrants are signed off by the Minister, and if they relate to New Zealanders, by a Commissioner of Intelligence Warrants, who must be a retired High Court judge. And my office looks at all of those warrants to ensure that the law is followed in every respect. In 1984, the thought police monitored the population, seeking out and even encouraging thought crimes. In New Zealand, the exercise of the right to freedom of expression under the law can or should never of itself justify an intelligence and security agency taking any action in relation to a person. And that right is specifically enshrined in the Intelligence and Security Act. But I also think that it means that we, both you as members of the public and my staff and I, have to be constantly vigilant to give that right full effect. Winston Smith's job at Ministry of Truth was to erase politically inconvenient data from the public record. And I think in the intelligence world, for all the doubts and fears you might have about it, there are some moves to increase transparency. In New Zealand, both the SIS and the GCSB express a desire to say more publicly about what it is they do. For me, I have a statutory obligation to publish an annual report and to publicly report on every inquiry to the agencies that I do. And I've tried to make those reports meaningful and in each case to extend the public's knowledge of what it is that the intelligence agencies do. My starting point is to publish as much as possible. Nothing should be protected as classified simply because it might be inconvenient for it to be known or it might be politically embarrassing. (1984) tells us that both information and power need to be diffuse, and we shouldn't be complacent about that idea. We have to be confident that the assessments made by our intelligence agencies about what are the threats facing us and how to respond are right and meet with our values and our expectations. And I think the Cullen and Reedy report showed that there are a number of New Zealanders, a significant proportion, who have their doubts about that. I see my office as having a significant role in creating that public trust and confidence through our independence and our ability to find out and state the facts of the matter and the truth of the situation, and to let the public know as much about that as possible. Essentially, it's trust by proxy, and I know that's not perfect, but that's what we've got for now. So thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Can I ask one?
How many warrants are refused?
Because it strikes me that this whole thing hinges on trust, and in order to trust that the warrant process isn't about a stand, we kind of need to see some warrants applied. How often does that happen?
I don't have a statistic for that, but I do know that when an application for a warrant goes up to the Minister and or the Commissioner of Intelligence warrants, that they will often ask questions, ask the agency to go back, find out some more information or do some more work. That may change the nature of the warrant, might result in the Minister imposing conditions on the way the warrant is exercised, and while I don't have the figure for it, I'm sure in some cases it means that the Minister says, no, I don't think this is a good idea.
Excellent. So I think at this stage we could have some short questions from the floor. We've got till about 1:30. Just wind up this panel by 1:35 at the latest. I have to be dashing out the door by 1:40. But I can see hands up. Yes, Matt Bay.
Hi, I don't want to wind up the panel at all, but a question for you, Cheryl. In 1984, there's only one Big Brother, but in our debate in New Zealand, we have a tendency to talk about a society. So my question for you is about foreign powers. A, is it technologically possible for a foreign agency to spy on New Zealanders? B, what are the controls that we have in place? And C, are you comfortable that those are adequate?
It's an issue, obviously, that comes up a lot because New Zealand is part of the Five Eyes, the alliance of the US, UK, Australia, Canada. And it's public knowledge that those agencies share intelligence both ways. But what I can say is that they do have the New Zealand agencies, but also to the extent that I can sense it, their counterparts do have controls around what each agency can do in relation to each other's citizens. So the general rule underpinning that is that, for example, the New Zealand agency shouldn't be allowed to ask their foreign counterparts to do something in relation to New Zealanders that the SIS or GCSB can't do. And so part of my oversight function is to look, for example, at how information might be shared by the New Zealand agencies with their overseas counterparts, what protections are put on information that they provide, how confident can the New Zealand agencies be that those protections will be observed, what do they require of their counterparts in terms of training and assurance and all those things. So I can't give you an absolute unqualified answer, but I can say that those things are part of the framework under which our intelligence agencies operate.
Sorry, I should have clarified. I wasn't thinking about the sharing situation. I was thinking about direct conduct. Is there any risk that, for instance, someone in a city around the world is listening to me right now, not via the GCSB? Does that make sense?
I understand what you mean. I suppose the short answer is, if it wasn't something done in conjunction with the New Zealand agencies, I wouldn't know about it.
Yeah.
I would say it was highly unlikely.
But plausible if your data leaves New Zealand, which it almost all does because we all use services that are based outside New Zealand. So it's possible. I defer to you on how likely, but it's certainly possible. And I actually had an argument with Nicky Harger about this many years ago, and I was right at the time, but I'm wrong now, because he wrote about Five Eyes. And at the time, all Five Eyes could do effectively was to capture satellite data, and increasingly it was going, of course, across the Trans-Pacific cable. But now we can actually look inside packets, IP packets, which is something that was not dreamed of 20 years ago. So the ability to inspect traffic in real time is remarkable these days. And there's a New Zealand company out of Waikato University that has done quite a lot of that work as well. So.
Sorry, one. Yes.
One looks at programs like Black Mirror and thinks, involved, yes, that's science fiction. And the program in particular, where the woman's personal rating, for those who saw it, governed every part of her life and descended her from being socially elite to socially not so elite and on the streets, is effectively what you were talking about, Cheryl, in China and in Russell in China and other places. And it's all being run by algorithms, of course. And your point, Cheryl, about the fact that the algorithms are not transparent and not accountable is particularly concerning, because it means that the sorts of oversights that you have aren't necessarily available to you. What should we be doing about that? Should we be checking the algorithms before they're even put in place, scrutinising the code, etc., to make sure? Because we now know that rubbish in, rubbish out means that those algorithms are racist, misogynist, etc. What should we do about it?
There was in the wide story on the social credit scheme in China, one suggestion was that if this does become, in one way or another, a practice in other countries, one possible solution is to demand transparency into the algorithms. And I'm not qualified to know exactly how that would work, but that we would know, how we were being seen. I don't know, maybe you could go and check your score, but that does seem to be one potential option. Yeah. Well, I mean, Google kind of does that.
I'd just like to thank the panelists for their views and to observe that it's strange that a fiction should result in these realities that you've been talking about. Fiction that was written so long ago. But my real question is, how do we broaden this debate? Because privacy is sort of an abstract, and it's a very off-field sort of an abstract. I wanted to know how people generally handle this debate, and how we can broaden this debate to make sure that the issues you've raised, Sarah, are sort of in the mainstream rather than some aspect called abstract. It's called privacy. Because I don't identify with privacy, I just don't see it as anything tangible. There's nothing tangible to it except the CCTV cameras or whatever. But we know what's going on in that place, but we can't do anything about it. That seems to be the overwhelming case of what you've put here, because together you've all listed authorities, police, the market, CCTV cameras and the symptoms, but there's no way that everyday people can address that issue that you've been talking about. Can you give us an idea?
I don't know if this is a direct response, but it reminds me that all of these scorings are by their nature reductive. I think that there was, and to what extent again do we embody that change? To what extent do we think what is our habitus? What is our behaviour that we don't even recognise that we are pursuing because of these reductions of privacy or peculiar contextualising of our privacy? And how does it impact the way that we think and feel? I think that, look, to me the response is to continue to invest in the things that can't be calculated, to continue to invest in humanity. I mean, I think the thing that makes 1984 a great book is not, if it was only a dystopian projection, it would be an interesting book. What makes it a great book is that it has a great hero in it, a Hamlet character who is dissatisfied with the status quo, doesn't quite know how to change it, but knows that it's wrong. Winston Smith is right when he says that the answer lies with people. So what is the answer? I'm an artist. I'm going to say that art is the answer. Sorry? What if your art is?
It's circumscribed.
Well, yeah, indeed. Well, that becomes problematic. But there is always the impulse to rebel. There is always there remains the human knowledge of what is right beyond what is circumscribed. We know when we are most ourselves. Why do we walk in the forest? Why do we go to the beach? Why do we swim in the ocean? Why do we seek the most intimate privacies? And I guess it's to remind ourselves that there are things about human nature that are unchanging and unchallengeable, even while our habitus develops such that we become infected with the collective so-called values of a society. And I think that some people do feel that their face is beneath a boot. In Australia, I would describe recent government policies as being a kind of war conducted against a generation of people, against young people, particularly young people who are interested in things that do not directly serve the market. You know, a division was recently made in the funding of tertiary vocational education, a division between those things that did serve the market and those things that were said to be lifestyle choices. Of course, any student pursuing the arts is, or indeed literature, is a lifestyle choice. If you walk through one of the most largest and most revered libraries in Australia, the Bar Smith Library at the University of Adelaide, it has had a massive reduction on the shelves. You know, I went looking for a William Faulkner biography the other day. It doesn't exist in the Bar Smith Library. Aren't students studying modernism? Aren't they? You know, wouldn't you think someone would be looking for a biography of Faulkner? They can't find it. But one is surrounded by books about the market, about business and about the market and marketing and accounting. These are massive changes that infect the way that people think, the way that conversations are had about education and what is a human life in this society around dinner tables and you know. And there are plenty of people left behind, and I think there are plenty of young people in Australia who feel that boot on their head.
Faulkner also said that history is not was. History is now. My question is from a remark Cheryl made that a lot of these activities that are undertaken in private. But when you think about 1949. It was 3 years into the House of Un-American Activities, very public criticisms of people who wanted to keep the peace. It was a lead into the activities of the Senator from Wisconsin, public criticism of the individuals. And of course 1949 was 2 years before we had the legislation that overrode the waterfront dispute. And my question, or the remarks I think, how do we protect what Terry says, our liberal democracy? We're talking about specific legislation, specific positions to protect certain positions, but how do we override all of this by sort of overarching protections and not heading towards a Jeffrey Palmer and Bedford Constitution? It seems as though we may need something of that sort, where there's an overriding protection of citizens. That's a general remark.
I think we may have to think about that, all of us, as to how we respond. Just in way of closing, I can just say some very brief remarks. And it's really come up, Terry's raised it, Paul at the back has raised it in different ways, as to how do we respond in situations where we see authoritarian developments within our own society, anti-democratic developments of some nature, and when, to use Orwell's words, is something more than mute protest in our own bones required? When are we actually going to take some action? Are we going to take a stand? Is it just signing an online petition? Oh, we've done our bit, that's all we need to do. And I think it's picking up on your point as to when do people actually rebel, like our hero Winston Smith, perhaps knowing that one's fate may not be the sort of Hollywood ending, but at least are prepared to act with courage. And in the introduction to this Australian edition of 1984 that came out in 2016, Charlotte Wood, in a very thoughtful introduction, says that 1984 is still capable of bringing fresh truth into our lives. And the question rises up, where does our freedom exist? How does it manifest? From Orwell, I think the answer may be this, that freedom only exists in the moments when we exercise it. And if we fall silent through distraction or obedience, exhaustion, fear, our freedom evaporates and we are left worshipping only its empty image. And I thought that was a very powerful statement in terms of what our responsibilities as individuals to really care about the society and the way it's evolving, and who feel uncomfortable about some of those developments and want to do something about it. So I'd like to thank you all for attending. I know there's people who'd like to stay longer, some are anxious obviously to get away. I'm one of those, unfortunately. I have to be on that 2 o'clock ferry or the matron of my rest home will be on to me. But I'd like to thank you. This has been a very thoughtful occasion, and I'd like to thank again the Privacy Commissioner's Office and the fine staff who are here today for putting on this special occasion. Thank you all, and thank the panellists very much for their remarks.